The Heat have tied up their series with the Celtics, and with Game 3 set to tip off on Saturday, we're joined by John Karalis of Locked On Celtics to talk about the biggest stories in the series, what adjustments both teams will make, and why Boston fans and media keep underestimating Miami. Hang on tight for another crossover episode of Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Fired up for today's episode. It's a special Locked On Heat, Locked On Celtics crossover edition. I'm here with John Karalis of Locked On Celtics, David Ramil from Locked On Heat. I'm Wes Goldberg, also from Locked On Heat. I made this joke with you two already, but for our listeners, I'm going to be playing hybrid point guard like Tyler Hero did in Game 2. Hopefully, I'll be just as efficient in trying to hit as many of these storylines and adjustments and everything we need to hit going into this big Game 3 in Miami. Series is tied. We'll talk about some of those adjustments that we think that these teams will make in a minute, but I want to start by zooming out and taking a look at the biggest storylines for each team. John, we'll start with you. What's the vibe in Boston? What are the Celtics talking about after Game 2?
Well, two very distinct questions there because the vibe in Boston is very split. There's a doom and gloom. It's happening again, which I understand, right? That Game 2 loss looked too familiar for a lot of my take. Like even those of us who are like, it's not that big of a deal, are thinking like, yeah, but it looked a little too similar to things we've seen before. So there's a little bit of that going back and forth. There's a kind of like a little battle going on between Celtics fans about how bad this Game 2 loss really was and what it means for the long term. What are the Celtics saying? Well, they had practice on Thursday, and the message was pretty consistent that it's on them, right? It's like Miami made the adjustments, and as much as Miami made the adjustments and played them pretty perfectly, the Celtics are looking at it as we didn't respond well enough to that. We didn't defend the three-point line well enough. We didn't defend in general well enough. We didn't get to our spacing. We didn't do the things we needed to do offensively to prevent some of the things that Miami did on the other end by making shots, being able to get back on defense, the turnovers, trying to feed Porzingis, stuff like that. So I think the general vibe for the team is keep doing what we do it a lot better, and understand that if that doesn't work, that there might be a couple of adjustments that they can go to. But I do think that the Celtics feel like they didn't play. They didn't match, I think, what Miami did as far as intensity and all of that. And I mean, from my perspective, it's kind of like insane that you didn't. But looking at the game all over again, it's like, yeah, they could have closed out. They could have done a lot of things better that they didn't do, and that hurt them.
It sounds like you're surprised that they didn't, because I watched that game too, and my first thing was like, wow, the Celtics really were not closing out very hard. And I understand part of that is schematically, like the game plan. You want to do a soft closeout, take away the drives, take away those two-pointers at the basket the Heat are trying to get to. But sometimes it was also just Jaylen Brown not doing his job. And I don't mean just to pick on Jaylen Brown specifically, but he was at fault a few times, and there was other guys 100%. Too.
I am surprised. Like, what Miami didn't surprise me. And the fact that Miami did it as well as they didn't surprise me. This is a Spo coach team, and not only do the Heat make adjustments, they make them like really well. The buy-in, the consistency, one of my questions after Game 1 was, after 85 games of playing a certain style of basketball, are the Heat really going to be able to come out and play this other style? And damn it, they just keep being able to do it. So that's Miami. That's what we should always expect from Miami. I am surprised that the Celtics didn't come out with that same, I shouldn't say didn't come out with, they didn't maintain that level, because they started in the first quarter. When I look back at the game, I'm really hyper-focused on the second quarter as where the game got away from Boston. They had an opportunity that they botched, and it's because they didn't make the little plays. And botching those little plays that could have added up Celtics went into that halftime up 3 after Jaylen Brown went nuts. They could have been up 13 and just would have been an entirely different dynamic to that game. So I am a little bit of surprised of what the Celtics didn't have that didn't play at the level they needed to.
David, what do you think after kind of thinking about the game, rewatching it? How much of this was a little bit surprising on the Celtics' part? Because I did come away a little bit surprised by how poorly they played. I mean, frankly, they did down the stretch. What were your takeaways, Dave?
From the Celtics perspective,
Or whatever.
I think,
I mean, just having thought about this for a while. Yeah.
I think I kind of speak for some Heat fans in terms of like they're still, I think, a lot of basking in the moment, and I think it's a little premature also because it is just one game, but it was an effective response from Miami, and that's my thought process about all this is moving forward. How does Boston respond? What are the adjustments that they make, and how do they approach Game 3 with a sense of urgency? And I think that's the big thing. As far as Boston's approach in Game 2, I don't know that they were necessarily that they didn't take it with the same kind of level of urgency or the same kind of just the idea of them having to do things better. I could see some of that. That was certainly the case in Game 2, but I think Miami caught them by surprise a little bit, which is a little again, that in and of itself is a surprise because Miami has made these adjustments in the past, and I know you can chalk it all up to, well, they had a hell of a shooting night, but you know what, they've had really good shooting nights against this Boston team specifically in the past. So I don't know how
why
much
is
of a surprise
that?
it really.
It's specifically
Why
Caleb
is
Martin.
that?
It's crazy.
It's Caleb
4 times this stat from Cooper Moorhead. 4 times in the last 2 postseasons, the Heat have shot better than 50% against the Celtics. That is a crazy number. That is a wild number. I mean, people always say you chalk it up to variance, you'll never get a miracle again like that. And the Heat have not only got a miracle like that once, but 4 times in the last 2 postseasons. Basically, in the last 9 games, they have shot against the Celtics. The last 9 playoff games against Celtics, in 4 of those games, they've made half of their 3-pointers. That's crazy.
I don't understand. I want you guys to explain to my listeners and explain to me. Yeah. How is that possible? How can Caleb Martin go 5 of 6? How can Jaquez go 3 of 6? How can this keep happening where you shoot 50+% in the playoffs after not being a big 3-point shooting team, after not being a very high percentage team? You come in and you do this again in Boston. The role players are supposed to play better at home, not on the road. It's very, very confusing.
Not in the Heat's case. The role players in Miami play better on the road than they do at home for some reason.
Well, look, I mean, we kind of talk about it a lot with the show. They've gone through almost 40 different starting lineups, and as cliche as it might sound, like all these different guys getting different opportunities in different scenarios throughout the course of the regular season, I really think has them ready at a level that most role players and other teams across the playoff landscape just aren't. They're just not at the same level because you've seen Jaquez, and look, he's a different kind of rookie, right? He's a rookie only in name. He's a little bit older. He's been there. He's been a little bit more experienced. And from day one, he's already been like very comfortable in what his role is. Caleb Martin is a completely different animal in the sense that 2 years ago, 3 seasons now, this is his 3rd season with Miami. He was basically out of the league, and who knows what would have happened, if not for a phone call from J. Cole to Caron Butler.
No, it's not. That is such an overstated storyline.
All
It's
right,
not
Wes,
J. Cole.
whatever.
He does not work for the Heat's front office. I'm so over this.
All right, whatever. Either way, he gets a tryout, and it turns out well.
Nothing to do with
right?
J. Cole.
Okay, and he gets lucky, and he turns into a really valuable role player. And so I think they've just been put in these positions time and again. And Spo, I mean, I know there's a lot of talk of dark magic and witchcraft and everything else like that. But as far as if you want to look at Heat culture and poke holes in it, that's fine. But the reality is that there's a level of accountability throughout the whole franchise. And I think he tells everybody to expect that you might get some playing time. And when you do, you have to start in that role, whatever it might be. And we see it time and time again during the playoffs.
And all of that stuff's certainly true, right? You can't deny the level of success the Heat have had with their role players over the last 2 or 3 seasons. But specific to this matchup against Boston, I think is sort of there's another layer on top of that. And I think part of this, John, is I'm a little surprised that Joe Mazzulla went with the same defensive scheme that he did last year when the Heat torched them from three-point range, with the soft closeouts, with letting Haywood Highsmith and Jaime Jaquez and Caleb Martin go. And it's not that I'm surprised that he did it at all. I'm surprised that he stuck with it throughout a game when those guys were catching fire, because it looked great in game one when nobody was hitting a shot. Nobody was poking holes in the strategy. But as soon as those guys start catching fire, it just feels like Mazzulla doesn't want to, for one reason or the other, kind of change mid-game. And I do wonder if we'll see a little bit more of an adjustment going into game three. But for whatever reason, like, the Heat feel comfortable in this Celtics matchup. And I do think something about the rivalry gets these guys fired up. I definitely think that that's an undeniable part of this. And that challenge of keeping up with Boston from a three-point rate perspective is something that I just think it's almost like, hey, rising tides lift all boats, or whatever the hell that phrase is. Like, it's almost like that. It's like, hey, the Celtics, we already know they're going to make like 23 pointers every game. So we've got to do that. Like, we've got to get close to it. Where in other matchups, you don't necessarily have to meet that threshold. But we're going to talk about some more adjustments here on our special Locked On Heat, Locked On Celtics crossover edition. What do the Celtics have to do to bounce back in game three? We'll get to that next here on our crossover episode.
Today's show is brought to you by Nissan. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little bit further? Ever wonder what adventure could be around the next corner? Our friends at Nissan have a lineup of SUVs with the capabilities to take your adventure to the next level, like the 2024 Nissan Rogue. It's perfect for city drives and great escapes. Class exclusive Google built-in is your always updating assistant to call on for almost anything. Forget connecting your phone and those wires hanging around everywhere. Their Google Assistant, Google Maps, Google Play Store are all built right into the 12.3-inch HD touchscreen infotainment system. The 2024 Rogue is perfect, a perfect midsize crossover for your next adventure. Nissan's incredible lineup also includes the 2024 Pathfinder. It has room for up to 8, an expansive cargo capacity, and advanced available 4x4 capability with 284 horsepower and up to 6,000 pounds of towing. When adventure calls, the Pathfinder is there to answer. Take the Nissan Rogue, the Nissan Pathfinder, or the big and beautiful Nissan Armada, and go find your next big adventure. Shop nissanusa.com. Today's show is also brought to you by BetterHelp. I'm a big proponent of therapy. I think it's helped me a lot. Maybe some Miami Heat fans think I could use some more, but that's fine. I'm open to that because BetterHelp is designed to be convenient, flexible, all suited to my busy schedule here covering the NBA. The thing that BetterHelp does is it allows you to find a therapist online rather than shopping around your neighborhood, your office, wherever you work, which opens up the possibilities of finding somebody that you can click with. You go to betterhelp.com/LockedOnNBA. Not only do you get 10% off your first month, you get to fill out the questionnaire. You get matched with a licensed therapist. If you don't click, then you can just change without any sort of extra fees. So that really helps you find a person that you can click with, that you can talk through stuff with, whether it's something simple like sports, something bigger like a relationship thing, or something more deep-rooted like a family issue. You can talk through it with somebody, a therapist at BetterHelp, H-E-L-P, BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. You get 10% off your first month. BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA.
Thanks for making the Locked On Podcast Network your first listen every day, whether you're watching on the Locked On Heat feed or the Locked On Celtics feed. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube. Make sure you're subscribed on your favorite podcast app. Before we get to any of the adjustments that the Celtics or the Heat can make, John, I do want to just share with you something that we found on a previous episode going into this series.
Fans are going to be in this comment section. They're going to be in this comment section for this show because they're going to call me arrogant and they're going to say, you don't know what's coming. These Celtics, blah, blah, blah. Okay, yeah, whatever. They're going to say I'm arrogant because I'm predicting a sweep. The Celtics are going to sweep the Miami Heat. I think this is a different Celtics team.
So what happened to the sweep, John? What happened to being ready for anything that was going to come their way? What happened?
I would say a gentleman's sweep still is in the lexicon. So I think I might get like a half point if the Celtics can close this out in 5. Look, I'm no doubt confident in the Celtics. I don't think I'm out of place by saying the Celtics are confident. And you got to take a stand. You got to make a you can't be on the fence when like I'm not going full Kendrick Perkins or whatever, but like, yeah, I still feel like the Celtics, and this is why I'm surprised, because I thought the Celtics were going to be ready. Miami comes out and they're playing a different way, and okay, maybe it does catch you by surprise. I think the thing that caught me in game 2 is that they didn't get out of it in the second half or the fourth quarter. And they kind of I think they fell into the trap. Like Miami lays the trap and Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown kind of buy right into it. Now, also into what I was saying is how you bounce back from something like this. Okay, so I'm wrong about a sweep, obviously, and maybe it'll go 5, maybe it'll go 6, maybe it'll go 7. At this point, we don't know. But it's all about how they bounce back, and being bought in doesn't mean being perfect. It means when you slip, you recover. And we saw what Miami did. They slipped in game 1. They recovered very well. Now, how do you recover from playing poorly? So that's where I'm going to hang my hat. I still obviously believe in the Celtics. They have a ton of talent. And when they play, I think when they play a certain way and not just chasing mismatches and slowing the game down, I think taking 80 field goal attempts is a problem for the Celtics. They really need to pump that up, which means play a little bit faster, crash the boards a little bit more. Mm-hmm. They're not a big turnover forcing team, but they are the number 1 team in contesting shots, and they didn't contest enough shots in game 1. So if they can do all of that stuff, then that still tells me they're bought in, and it still kind of plays into what I was saying, even though I'm wrong about the sweep. So I know Miami Heat fans come into the mentions and let me hear it.
Well, I will say, though, I think it was a little bit of dirty pool for you advocating and encouraging Locked On Celtics listeners to flood our comments and also misinforming them by telling them that we were ducking the smoke and
ducking the smoke.
Yeah, after you emailed us like less than not even 24 hours before the tip-off to preview a game and say, hey, you guys want to talk this afternoon for a game that's going to tip off like in 12 hours? It's like, well, that's not quite ducking the smoke. That's just poor planning. We had a play-in game to win the day before.
Tomato.
I was already drunk by the time I got that email, so I was just like, I was at a wedding. Yeah.
There was no
Listen,
chance.
It's about controlling the narrative. And as far as my fans know, you guys were ducking the smoke. And that's it. So congratulations on all the Celtics fans flooding your mentions. It's only fair. It's only fair. It's like a food fight between the two of our fan bases.
It's wonderful.
It is.
It's wonderful.
It is good tension.
Yeah. John, I want to ask you something you alluded to earlier, but the whole not going mismatch hunting, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown in particular, they both had great scoring games in game 2, but the Heat, they clogged all the pipes when it came to any kick out passes and all that stuff that Joe Mazzulla and the Celtics want to get to, that 5-out offense, the thing that has made their offense so special for the regular season. What adjustments, what counters do you think the Celtics can make? Because it's not an easy one when it's just like kind of getting baited into, we're just going to let you take Tyler Hero and Duncan Robinson one-on-one 6 feet away from the basket. Like, how do you not do that if you're one of those guys? And how do you kind of get back to that identity?
Yeah, you still attack it, but you don't tell everybody to spread out and slow it down and let Miami set their defense and let the Miami set their help and you don't do that. You move the ball. The thing with Boston's offense versus Miami's defense is that you're probably going to find some level of a matchup that's advantageous to Boston most places on the floor, right? Like you got Bam, who's potential defensive player of the year, right? You've got a couple other guys who are pretty good defenders. And then you've got a couple of guys who are either bad or average or and against what Boston has, it's an advantage for Boston. So what you do is you just run your offense. And when Jason Tatum turns and sees Tyler Hero, for example, just go right away. And if that collapses the defense, then you kick, play faster, start your offense earlier in the shot clock, and don't let Miami get set. Make somebody who's kind of like, oh, okay, my guy's over here. I'm just going to get my foot in the lane. I'm going to angle myself this way. No, just go and have somebody go, oh, crap, I got to help, right? Play on the muscle memory that's been there for 85 games, like I've been talking about, and force somebody to react to help, over rotate, and keep doing it. And then naturally, Porzingis, White, Holiday are all going to get involved in the offense. The number one problem for Boston's offense is that those three guys, until Derek White finally got going in the fourth quarter, those three guys gave them nothing. And Porzingis is the biggest issue because they specifically got Porzingis to deal with Miami. He's supposed to be the guy that pulls Bam out of being able to help. And you can credit to Jovic for the job he did. The Celtics have to make sure that they're pulling Jovic out of position so Porzingis can either roll down the lane, find a seam, get backdoor, something, so he can get involved. And now you're overreacting to Porzingis.
And to your point, like everything, all that stuff happens with speed. Like, and this kind of reminds me of the Eastern Conference Finals last year. It's like both teams they would get into these malaises of sort of just walking through their offense. And I thought the Heat were just so quick with everything that they were doing against the Celtics in Game 2. And then Boston was just like, yeah, I guess, like, Kristaps Porzingis has Caleb Martin on him. I guess we'll just sort of toss it to him into a post-entry pass. And the next thing you know, Caleb's getting around Porzingis, fronting him and deflecting the ball away, and it's a turnover for the Heat. So I think just, like, playing faster, playing harder is definitely an adjustment. One last thing, John, the defensive strategy that we talked about earlier, do you think that that's something that Joe Mazzulla sticks with in terms of leaving certain guys open, daring them to make those shots? Because the thing about Mazzulla, he does not strike me as a graduate of the Mike Budenholzer school of rigidness. You know, he's usually really creative, especially on the defensive end. And I thought it was a little strange that he just stuck with that coverage throughout Game 2, even when those guys were making shots. So what do you think happens in Game 3?
Well, I think in Game 2, we saw the Celtics' most effective defenses when they were really up on the ball and they really pressured the ball handlers coming off of screens. You can have your soft closeouts against a couple of guys. You can't have your soft closeouts against everybody. And it's about making sure that Tyler Hero and Duncan Robinson and, you know, the guys that can get like super hot are being run off the 3-point line, run into mid-range shots, giving the ball up. And then if it ends up with Caleb Martin, don't just walk out to him. Like when we say a soft closeout, like I've said this is going to be the third podcast in a row that I say this. Andre Drummond can hit 3-pointers when he's left all by himself and is just given a ton of time to shoot, right? Anybody who in the NBA given a ton of time to shoot can get themselves going. And answering my own question from like the first segment, Caleb Martin, it's not, I'm going to use the Marcus Smart comparison. Not that he's like what Marcus Smart was as a 3-point shooter, but when Marcus Smart got hot, he got hot. He holds the Celtics records for most 3-pointers made. When a guy who's a 35% 3-point shooter, 34% 3-point shooter, it's not that they hit 3 out of 10 and 4 out of 10 every other game. It's that they shoot 2 out of 10 for like 2-3 games and then have their 8 out of 10 game. That's what makes these guys what they are. So you can't let them get comfortable. So it's press up on the ball, make it uncomfortable, blow up the speed of Miami's offense, blow up the timing. And when it does get out to a shooter that you're okay with, still contest, right? But don't fly by him. Just contest, get up in his airspace, and you live with the result.
We'll get to the Heat adjustments. What are they trying to carry over from Game 2 into Game 3 to maybe even take a 2-1 lead in this series in Miami? We'll get to that next here on a Locked On crossover edition, Locked On Heat, Locked On Celtics.
Today's show is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. Now, I grew up in a small business. I was also a hiring manager at one point in my life. And I wish I had LinkedIn Jobs because it's not just a job board. You can hire professionals that you can't find anywhere else. The best part about what LinkedIn Jobs can do and that can help your small business, you're already like straight out, right? You don't have time to hire. They can find people who aren't even searching for jobs because 70% of LinkedIn users don't even visit another job site. They have their open to a new job setting set. So LinkedIn finds them for you. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. You can hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. They know that you're wearing a lot of hats. Maybe none as nice as Tyler Hero's, but you are wearing a lot of hats. LinkedIn is constantly finding ways to make the process easier. They have a feature where they can help you write your job descriptions. 2.5 million small businesses are using LinkedIn for hiring. Make yours one of them. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply.
Thanks for making the Locked On Podcast Network your first listen every day, whether it's on Locked On Heat or Locked On Celtics. Make sure you're subscribed to the YouTube channel and on your favorite podcast app. David, what do the Heat need to do? What do they want to carry over from Game 2 other than just shooting 50% from three, obviously?
Yeah, I don't see how likely they are to replicate that. Certainly not in Game 3, because I think the defensive adjustment from Boston will limit those opportunities. So, I mean, yeah, in an ideal world for Miami, they'd be able to shoot at that rate, but I think we'll see the necessary adjustment from Boston. So I know one of the common refrains from Game 2 was Miami beat Boston at their own game, more or less, because of the shooting volume and the fact that they were able to capitalize on a lot of those open opportunities. So I think they have to be prepared for those adjustments that the Celtics are likely to make. And having said all this, before I even actually give you the adjustment, Spo tends to lean into his strengths. Like we've heard it time and again. He doesn't like making those adjustments necessarily because he's like, let's continue to do what we do best. And at the same time, you have to be a little bit more flexible. So I'm curious to see exactly how he has the team prepared. But I'd like to see them kind of have more off-ball movement, incorporate more slip screens, things of that sort, get a little bit more cutting towards the basket. And that might throw a little bit of a monkey wrench into what Boston does defensively so they can kick it out, spray it to those open shooters who have to continue to knock down those shots with intent. And we hear that from Spo all the time. But we didn't see it in Game 1. There was too much hemming and hawing beyond the perimeter. Not sure what to do. I'm curious to see, again, how Tyler Hero manages the offense, because he was so vital to helping Miami get to their spots and having those open looks from beyond the perimeter with the ball in his hands. Can he duplicate that again in Game 3?
Yeah, that's sort of what I'm looking at too. You mentioned sort of the urgency that the Heat were playing with, that they didn't have in Game 1, that they did play with Game 2. We've already talked about it. That's in terms of what the carryover is. That's the carryover. It's not, hey, shoot 50% from three. The carryover, right, is just play with that level of urgency and that level of energy and that level of decisiveness. And then whatever comes after that, because, John, you saw this. Like, basically, Miami's first action, that was enough to get through. That was enough to puncture Boston's defense. That's not going to be the case in Game 3. The Celtics are going to dial that in. And then what happens when they dial it in, right? Maybe other things get sprung open in terms of what David was saying. Then maybe those backdoor cuts, those slip screens are available. They didn't need that stuff in Game 2. They're probably going to need it in Game 3, I would imagine, right?
Yeah, I would think they would have to get a little bit more creative in Game 3. Look, when we talk about what the Celtics are willing to live with, I think it's not just the soft closeouts on somebody like Caleb Martin. It's what they do, how far off that person, whomever it is, that they're willing to play to help. And so what are the Celtics going to do in that initial pick and roll, that initial action? Are they going to try to blow that up, or are they just going to try to steer that a certain way? And then I think one thing we might see from the Celtics is kind of like the late switches, veering guys into a spot. And what the Celtics didn't do well enough is the guy like Drew Holiday coming around pushing a Heat ball handler over the top and then sprinting straight to the corner to defend the kick out. Right. Rather than having it like there was one where Jaylen Brown stepped in and no one stepped out to, I think it was Jovic, and it was a wide open three. Yeah. That has to be, okay, we're going to allow Tyler Hero to get into that 2-point area because he likes to take those contested twos. And Boston is still, despite Bam Adebayo's huge game, still okay with Bam taking mid-range shots.
Right.
They want to funnel that in there. They just got to be better on the other side of that. So if the Celtics are better on the other side of that and they're helping, then what happens? Then now you've got a backdoor cut from the corner because Jaylen Brown is now stepping up and he's thinking, hey, Drew's got that guy. So you make that cut and you try to blow it up that way. So that I think is something that the Celtics have to watch for as like in the chess move, like, okay, here's ours, here's yours. What do you do after that?
Right. And that second thing that we're talking about in terms of the backdoor cuts and all that stuff that's going to be available, that's more of Miami's comfort zone. That's what they were trying to get to, but it wasn't there in game one. And they were trying to get to it so badly that they were just passing up open shots from 3-point range in game one. So they got to figure out a better balance. The one thing I know is not going to happen is that the Celtics are not going to outscore the Heat by 30 points from beyond the arc like they did in game one. And the Heat aren't going to outscore the Celtics from 30 points from behind the arc like they did in game two. We're probably going to see a closer margin. But for the Heat, the formula for Miami is, okay, let's like if we just accept the margin's going to be closer than 30 points, where can we make up those points? And I think you've got to limit the second chance opportunities that you gave up to Boston in that game. You certainly got to limit some of those turnovers that led to those fast break points for Boston. And that's how you start to close that margin again. You start to close that gap again. And I guarantee you that's going to be a message from Spo is, hey, we played great, but we can't rely on making half of our three-pointers anymore. So we got to clean up these other areas so that we don't have to literally make 53.5% of our three-point shots in order to win what ended up being still a close game in game two. Any other adjustments? I'll just leave it up to the field here that we want to talk about. Can we talk about Bam Adebayo's screening? Because that might be the biggest thing that Boston has to overcome. Because his screen game was unreal in game two. And
are you baiting them now?
Officiating.
Are you baiting them now? Because I know a lot of Celtics fans. Well, I say a lot of Eastern Conference fans outside of Miami think that he is a master of the illegal screen, and I just think that's par for the course around the NBA.
He is. He's a master at the illegal screen, and that's a credit to him. It's a credit to him.
You do what you're allowed to get away with. I think, and listen, I've said this to Celtics fans before. I would love to get into the Bam Adebayo conversation with the illegal screens, but Al Horford is not exactly innocent either.
Sure.
And so
none of the good ones are. None of these veteran seasoned great screensetters. Right. Nobody's just standing still and waiting for somebody to run into them. It's an art. It's not a science.
Right.
And these guys are artists.
So the only thing that I would like to see called, just in general, is when you're sliding along with the guy. Just anything that would impede. I don't know how to say this because it's all designed to impede his progress. I know what you mean. It's the one where you slide up when your body's angled and you slide up, and it's not necessarily like the butt out, like the obvious, like the Kyle Lowry one that he always gets called for when he just sticks his ass out in the air and just somebody runs into it. Like, it's not that. It's a very subtle, like, let me just slide with my body angled in a certain direction, and next thing you know, like, Drew Holiday is running into a shoulder, not necessarily the whole body, but he's running into Bam Adebayo's hip or something like that, as opposed to, just barely grazing it. I would gladly trade the same call for Al Horford to get that call for Bam Adebayo. Like, if you're going to say
different frequency. Yeah,
that's right. That's the thing.
And we disagree.
We should not entertain an officiating discussion on this show. I may come on with half the starting lineup in Boston.
I didn't bring it up
all over the place. Come on.
If you think that the officiating is screwing the Celtics, let us know in the Heat comment section. No. If you think the officiating is screwing the Heat, go into Locked On Celtics and let them know.
Can I just be clear? I didn't bring it up. I didn't bring it up. And I'm not commenting on the officiating because not once did I think the officiating was a reason why the Celtics lost.
No, you're right. I baited you just like Eric Spoelstra baited Jason Tatum and Jaylen
That's
Brown.
right. And I took it just like Tatum and Brown. I got to be better. So I'm going to go watch the film. I'm going to see how it can be better for the next crossover.
The mind games are playing out here.
These crossovers are always a delight. John, I always enjoy talking hoops with you. And we're very much looking forward to Game 3 in Miami. John, you will be here covering it for Locked On Celtics. We will obviously be here covering it for Locked On Heat. In the meantime, thanks for making the Locked On Podcast Network your first listen every day. Hit that subscribe button on YouTube and on your podcast app.